Hello everyone, Sabrina here and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a 5-card one kit video. I know it's been quite a long time since I've done one of these, but I absolutely fell in love with the Hero Arts May 2021 card kit. I'm a little bit late, but I always kind of have to prioritize Scrappy Tales, but I had enough time to create 5 pretty quick and easy cards using this kit. So here I'm showing you everything that came in the kit. You get a 6x8 ocean inspired stamp set with coordinating dies, a black and gray mini ink cube, some light blue shimmery embossing powder, and then a couple specialty cardstock papers. And whenever I work with a card kit, I always like to do my stamping, coloring, and die cutting beforehand. So that is what I did here. I stamped most of the images from the stamp set twice, and I did use all of the images. Some of the smaller ones, like the shells and the starfish, I might have stamped like 3 or 4 times just to have a little bit extra on hand in case I needed, that little something on the card. But this was all I needed for my 5 cards today. Included in that stamp set is this nice sized coral piece, and this is just illustrated so beautifully, and it was my favorite thing to color. I left in all the coloring because I really enjoyed this process. It took about 2 hours to color everything, but I definitely took my time with it. I tried to be very careful to not color outside the lines. I am using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers here, and on some of the larger images, I'm going to pull in my water brush. So you can see with this orange coral that I'm coloring now, I started with my darkest marker, mapped out my shadow areas, then I went over that darker color with my mid-tone marker and extended it more towards the center. 9 times out of 10, I always do a center highlight. For me, that's just the easiest to figure out in my brain. Basically, the center is where the highlight would be. So I mapped out most of my darker color towards the edges of every fish and coral. And then again, I pulled it more in with my mid-tone, and then I left just a slight amount of white still showing on a couple of the images. Some of them I had to completely color in because they were too small, but a lot of these I left a little bit of white showing in the center. And that is so that I could go over the entire image with my water brush pen. And that pen is filled with gold perfect pearls and water. That's it. The perfect pearls adds a really pretty shine. It's very similar to the Wink of Stella pen, and it's pretty subtle unless you have direct light on it. If you want to add silver perfect pearls or the color perfect pearl that comes in the perfect pearls, that's going to give you more of that silver shimmer pen that like Nuvo has and Tonic. So yes, but like I said, some of these are a little bit too small, and I just ended up coloring them entirely with my markers. And I'm really glad that I did that because I do have a tendency to be heavy-handed with my water, and that sometimes leads to me coloring outside the lines. Now, to try to avoid that, I did clear heat emboss all of my stamped images. So I stamped them all with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a wet ink. It stays sticky for a while so that you can pour your clear embossing powder over. Then I heat set that, and that leaves me with a raised stamped outline. And that just helps me with my watercoloring to try to stay inside the lines, and it's something I do 95% of the time when I'm working with my zigs. So I left all the coloring in because I was able to use super vibrant markers that I don't normally get to use, and I just think it turned out so beautiful. And part of the reason I enjoyed making these cards so much was the coloring portion, and sometimes I am not in the coloring mood, and lately I have been making a lot of die cut cards. But for some reason, this stamp set really spoke to me, and I immediately knew I wanted to use my zigs. And I'm so glad that I did because it just turned out so fun. And you'll see when I die cut everything and line them all up on my table, it's just like bright, cheerful goodness. I love tropical fish and coral because some of the colors that they come in are not colors that you see a lot in nature. So I don't know. I really enjoyed it. All right, so For a few of these images, I'm combining color families. So this seahorse, you can see I started with a dark purple marker and I blended it out with a light blue just to give it a cool gradation. There are a couple clownfish in this stamp set, which I was so happy to see Dory and Nemo in there. So I'm coloring them traditional. You can see that single coral I colored off camera since I showed you that entire big coral. But that one I used red, orange, and yellow, and I didn't necessarily blend them all together. They're all kind of just sitting next to each other, and that creates such a cool look. And that's what corals look like in real life. So that's kind of what I was going for. I didn't want anything to be super blended. I'm going to do the same thing with the jellyfish. I used pink and purple. And then these starfish, I add pink to the center and brown to the edges. Again, not colors you would typically mix together, but that's what they look like in real life. It's really cool. All right, so there's this one not so cute fish, but by coloring him in a vibrant green, I think he just fits very well with the other fish. You also get a tigerfish, and I had fun coloring him in. There's so much detail, even the little stripes. And when I was looking at tigerfish, they have transparent wings. So I kind of made their wings like a cream color, and I made it so that you could see the stripes through the fin. All right, and then all I have left is my Dory fish. I don't know what these are called. I am not well versed in types of fish, but I know in every fish stamp set that I get, every single one of them includes Dory and Nemo. Am I wrong? I feel like that's the case. Even in past Hero Arts kits, I feel like if there's a clownfish, there's always a Dory fish, you know? But I have to say, Hero Arts always does a fantastic job with their summer card kits. And I, for some reason, gave away last year's kit with like the scuba diver and Atlantis, which I kind of regret because that would have coordinated really well with this kit. But I'm glad that I only showcased what comes in the May 2021 kit. I know I'm pretty late, but it's still the middle of summer, so I feel like it's fine. Here I'm going over all the images with the white still showing with my water brush pen, and what that does is it pulls the darker pigment from the edges towards the center and kind of creates a highlight color. You can really see it here with this purple coral. And this is what I like to do with my zigs. I only use typically 2 markers, a dark marker and a mid-tone, and then I use my brush, water brush, to create the highlight color. So here's everything die cut. I only had 1 image left over. So if you want more to choose from, definitely just stamp and color a couple extras. All right, so now we can finally start card 1. I did get a little bit of a weird angle, but I'm going to fix that in a couple minutes. So I want to do some ink blending, and I wanted there to be rays of sunlight showing through the water. So I don't have a stencil. I don't know why. I really need to invest in one. But you can create these rays on your own just with a ruler, as you just saw there. And I cut them with my trimmer and just arranging them onto this panel. I think this is about 2.5 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall. And I'm going to start with Mermaid Lagoon. Now you can see I glued these rays to my glass mat, but I need to glue them to the back of my panel because it's still going to slide. So that's what I'm doing here. I am lining them back up and I'm taping them to the back of the panel. So obviously this would be much easier if you have a stencil, but I did want to show it in case you don't, that you can easily create your own little rays. And I'm using just scrap white cardstock for those. All right, so I'm going back to my blending. So I started with Mermaid Lagoon and now I'm going over the top section with tumbled glass. And then when I remove these masks, white is underneath. So I thought they were a little too stark. So I'm going to take whatever's left on my blender brush and just go over those white areas. That's going to set it back more and make it more natural looking, I feel. Okay, I'm going to splatter some water onto this panel. It is an ocean background after all, and I feel like water splatters kind of create the look of bubbles. All right, so I'm going to take some of my fishies and arrange them onto this panel. And I felt like something was missing, so I'm going to end up adding some sand. I went ahead and die cut 2 craft slimline hillsides. This is a Scrappy Tails die. I mainly just wanted that slope, and I'm going over 2 of these. So these 2 are going to last me for all 5 cards. I'm going over them with Versamark ink. And then I'm going to take several embossing powders that I have in my stash, and I'm going to mix them to create sand. Because sand has a lot of granules and a lot of different colors if you look at it closely. So this is like a copper glitter embossing powder, and I'm just sporadically pouring each powder over the hillside in no particular way. I just kind of want to try my best to blend them together. What I just added there was regular old gold metallic embossing powder, and this one is actually called sand, like Sandy Coast or something, and it's gold glitter. And I think out of the 3, that one resembles the most like sand. But by mixing them all together, I feel like it really gives you that sandy look. And I know Hero Arts in a previous kit gave us sand embossing powder, and I used every bit of it, so I don't have any left. So I'm just kind of making my own here. But if you have sand embossing powder, obviously that would work much better. But I really do like how this turned out. I especially like it before it's heat set. But obviously once you heat set it, it's going to get really shiny and sparkly also, because some of those powders have glitter in them. They're also going to mix once it's heated up, so it's not going to look as harsh as it does when it's not heat set. I'm going to use one of these sandy hillsides on an actual slimline card, and then the other one I'm going to chop up for my smaller cards. So you can see I don't need a lot of sand for this small panel. So I'm going to take a slimline stitch rectangle die to cut the piece that I need. And this die just happens to be the same size as the panel I ink blended on, and it might have been the same die that I used to cut it out. I'm not sure, but they're stitching all the way around, and I kind of like how these fish look. I am going to change it up, I think, but I'm just kind of playing around. There's so many fish to choose from. I'm just kind of figuring out what looks best. Also debating if I want to add the sand or not, but I think the sand kind of grounds everything, so I am going to add that. Included in the stamp set are some bubbles, and I'm going to stamp a couple of those around my fish. I'm using some Unicorn White Hero Arts ink for that. My ink pad's pretty dry, so it's not very visible. So in my second and third card, I'm going to heat emboss the bubbles with the blue powder that came in the kit instead. But this is obviously much more subtle, and it really does dry back quite a bit. I'm not even sure if you can really see them, but it's okay. A lot of the fish end up covering it anyway. So I did off camera die cut a bunch of extra white die cuts to layer behind my colored die cuts. And I like to do this to add dimension. It's also very clean, and I know that it's going to go through the mail just fine. So you can see I tried to glue my sand the wrong way, so I had to flip it and fix that, but that was Okay. I did white heat emboss the sentiment, sending you a little vitamin C. That was my favorite sentiment from the stamp set. I use it on quite a few cards. I think it's a great, like, thinking of you type sentiment. Once again, I rearrange all of my different fish. It really doesn't matter what you use because they all look really nice, but I wanted to use that jellyfish. I think that's such a cool image. So I think I've settled for this. I'm going to go ahead and pop up everything. For most of these die cuts, I am using 2 white die cuts to layer behind my colored die cut. And I did cut all the white ones from 110 pound white Nina cardstock. I use scraps. So this is a great way of using every small piece of scrap that I keep. And like I said, I just love the dimension that it adds. All right, so now I can go ahead and actually glue everything to my panel. And I really love that the rays that we added just adds a little bit of interest to an otherwise fairly simple card. All right, I already have foam tape on the back of this, and I created the card base using one of the striped embossed specialty cardstock papers that came in the kit. It just adds a little subtle texture to the background. I'm also going to pop up my sentiment, so it's going to overhang the blue panel a little bit, so on that section I'm going to add 2 layers of foam tape. Then to embellish most of these cards, I am using a combination of droplets from a previous Hero Arts card kit. I love these. They come in blue and green. I only use blue for my cards today. And then I have these larger clear droplets. So I also used those. All right, so that finishes off my first card. Now I'm going to create my slimline card. So I have my long sandy hill. I'm going to trim it down a little using my stitch rectangle die. I'm also going to use 2 stitch circle dies to create some rings for my card. Now you can see I am cutting silver right now, but I'm going to end up going with some dark yellow rings. And the reason why is because I wanted them to look like portholes on a yellow submarine. I'm even going to cut these rings from gold because I'm incredibly indecisive, and I do this a lot on my cards and I don't share it a lot on my videos, but I do so much extra die cutting because sometimes I want a certain color, but I don't know if another color will be better, and 9 times out of 10 I will go with the original color that I wanted. However, I originally wanted silver, but I went with the dark yellow. So sometimes it's good, just take that extra time. You have a couple extra silver and gold rings that you can use on other cards. In fact, I'll use 1 gold one on my final card. But I am using, again, Mermaid Lagoon and Tumbled Glass to blend onto my white stitch rectangle. I love this combination together. And I'm using some lightweight white cardstock, and I ended up crumpling it in the center. It ends up being fine because I pop it up with very sticky foam tape. But I normally ink blend on watercolor paper or on 110 pound paper. I'm going to add some more water splatters. It's kind of subtle. If you use watercolor paper, it's going to bleach more and be more noticeable. So here I have my gold, silver, and yellow, and definitely the yellow pops the most. So that's what I ended up going with. And then I have all of my die cuts, and all I have to do is create scenes. And that's what I really love about die cutting and coloring ahead of time, because once that's all done, you can just make a bunch of cards. And it's fairly quick and easy. I don't have to stop what I'm doing to stamp and color particular images. It sometimes means that I'm left with a couple extra die cuts. Sometimes it means I don't have enough. So I tend to do more than I think I need, and I might have 2 or 3 leftovers. In this case, I only had 1 extra seahorse. So I stamped out just enough. And it also, once you start winding down on what you have in terms of die cuts, You can then get a little bit more creative on how you can use whatever's left over. So cards 4 and 5, I didn't have much to choose from. So card 4 in particular is not a card I would have normally came up with on my own, but because I didn't want to stamp and color extra images, I managed to work with what I have. But you can completely avoid this, obviously, by stamping and coloring extras. So here's what I was talking about earlier. I decided to ink up the bubbles with Versamark ink and use the embossing powder that came in the kit to emboss them. I also went ahead and white heat embossed the sentiment, "Saltwater heals everything." That's going to go behind one of my yellow windows. And I really love the sentiments that came in the stamp set. They're really different than what I normally see in fish stamps. Okay, so I wanted to spruce up my windows. And you know, if there's a window on a card, I'm going to add acetate. So that's what I'm doing here. I have some scraps of acetate and gluing behind my frames. And I'm going to really make these look like portholes by adding some gems all the way around. So it kind of resembles like the studs that you would see on these type of windows. All right, so I'm going to trim off the excess acetate. You can see I keep all of my little scraps. And then I have some gems by Lucy's Cards. I bought a lot of her gems and pearls recently, and they are amazing. She's in the UK, and she is a small business owner, so I wanted to support her. And I did have to pay a lot of shipping for them, but these gems are going to last me for a very long time, and I love them. So I'm using some yellow gems here. You can also go with pearls, but it just adds a little something to those windows. All right, I'm going to pop up my sand with some foam tape. This foam tape is by Uline, super duper sticky. Once it's down, it ain't coming up. All right. I believe I also pop up my windows, and I use Scotch for this because I have to trim it into smaller strips. And if you remove the backing on your Scotch 3M foam tape, you have the ability to manipulate it into whatever shape you want. So I was able to turn the foam tape around in the circle. I am laying them over my ink blended panel, but I'm not pressing down anything yet, just in case the spacing isn't quite right. So I normally like to start with my 2 outer elements, and then once those are adhered, I just add my centerpiece, and then everything tends to be lined up pretty well. You can also make these portholes into shakers. That would be very cute. But I knew there was going to be tons of fish. I decided to just pop them up. So a couple of these gems are raising that sand up a bit, and it just looked bumpy. So I decided to remove those gems so that everything is pretty even. All right. There's that jellyfish again. I think that was my favorite fish from the stamp. It's so cool looking. But again, I just lay out all of my die cuts, trying to figure out what I like. And I think if you're new to scene building, ocean cards in general are super simple. You just need some fish, some coral, and blue paper. You don't even need to do ink blending. Of course, I love to ink blend. All right, so I figured out a layout that I like. I will pop up some of the die cuts with my white die cuts, and on some of them I'm adding 2 layers, some I'm adding 3. I just like to have variation on my cards. So this jellyfish, I think I only added 1 layer because she was already kind of popped up with the porthole and the sand. I did the same with the coral and that little clownfish that's to the right of the coral and that shell. But this yellowfish, for example, I think I add 3 white die cuts behind him because I want him to be as dimensional as those portholes. You can see I have a seahorse on the top right. I felt like it just was overhanging a bit too much. It looked crammed, so I decided to remove the seahorse and put a bubble there instead. But it does kind of look cute with the seahorse there. If it was just a tiny bit smaller, I think that would have looked good. All right, so here are my blue droplets and my clear droplets that I'm just going to scatter around in a diagonal, going from the bottom left to the top right. I have already popped this panel up with my U-line foam tape. This foam tape is very inexpensive, guys. I think one roll is like $8. So I don't mind being generous with it. I have this little sea star that I cut so that I could tuck it behind the porthole. I did not add any dimension to that one. And that is going to complete my second card design. I think this one turned out really nice. I love those bright yellow circles. All right, so I wanted to do something different with these corals. I saw Hero Arts, their design team made the most amazing no-line colored cards. But because I had already colored mine, I wanted to try something unique. I'm going to be creating an A7 card. I have an A7 card base here. I lined up that coral die to the edge of the score line of my A7 card base, and I'm going to line it up in my die cut machine, and I'm hanging that score line out of my plates just so that it doesn't cut through the entire card. Jennifer McGuire recently did this type of card in one of her latest videos, and so I was very inspired by that, and that's how this card kind of came together. So the flap is going to be the actual coral. I want to have another coral coming on the top right. So I'm going to take an A2 card base that was cut wrong or scored wrong, one of the two. It was not usable, but it had a score line, so I was like, okay, I'll use this. I did the same thing. I lined up the die, overhanging the side just a little bit so that it would not cut completely through the card base. But by leaving the score line untouched, it creates a hinge, and it just makes the die cut more substantial. So I'm taking my scissors to cut off the extra, but by having that panel on the back, it allows me to just glue that to the back of my A7 card. I decided to trim it down a bit because I didn't need the full panel. I'll add ATG tape to the back and glue it to the back of my A7 card. All right, so here I'm kind of seeing what that looks like. I think that's really cool and different. I have another ink blended panel. I used tumbled glass, peacock feathers, and blueprint sketch. And I don't know if I mentioned that the slimline card was peacock feathers and tumbled glass. I'm not sure. I might have said Mermaid Lagoon, but that's not the case. Love this blend. I splattered some water splatters on the background, and I didn't really like that when you opened the flaps of the coral that they were white, so I decided to also blend on those, starting with peacock feathers and tumbled glass at the top. Totally unnecessary. I think the white does look fine. I just kind of wanted everything to be cohesive. I am going to end up putting a fresh white panel on the back of this card, and that is where the recipient would write their message. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and glue the panel to the center. Also going to splatter some water, and I love how that looks. So this is a 5x7 panel that I'm gluing right now. And now it's really going to start looking like an ocean. I added glue to the back of my coral, and there were some spots because I overhung that die. It didn't cut them out fully, so to disguise that, I'm adding some more ink. I'll have to do that on the top piece as well. And here I realize I should have used tumbled glass, but it ends up being fine because most of it gets cut off, because once I add the coral back on top, because this coral is partially cut off, you can see it's shorter, I had to hand cut the top with my scissors, so I'm gonna hand cut the top of this flap as well. All right, so now I can just lay out my fish. I think out of the 3 cards, this one is by far my favorite. That coral is so cool. And I knew I wanted to put it on an A7 card because it's nice and big. All right, so I am just layering up all of my fish with the white die cuts. I'll have the little clownfish peeking through the coral. So this is technically a trifold card. I know if Jennifer McGuire was to make something similar to this, she would make it so that the top blue panel would fold up to reveal a card inside where you can write the message. But I decided that I really liked how it was as is, and I didn't want to make it any thicker than it already was. So as I mentioned, the recipient would write the message on the back of this card. I'm going to add some sand to the bottom. I'm using up every last scrap that I have. And I'm going to glue this lionfish in a way, not lionfish, why do I keep saying that? This tigerfish in a way so that I could tuck my coral beneath its body to keep the coral closed. You can see here currently that because they are on hinges, they want to pop up. All right, so I'm going to add some hidden sentiments, and I used a few. I could not decide which one I wanted, and I had the room to add multiple sentiments. So I went with sending you a little vitamin C, salt water heals everything, and you are fantastic. I am stamping these out with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I am going to clear heat emboss them. I should have done this before gluing my die cuts. So I'm just going to make sure that my heat tool is nice and hot before bringing it over to my card. I have the bubbles again. I am inking them up with Versamark ink, and I will pour the glittery light blue powder that came in the kit. I think this is a fun embossing powder. I don't have anything like this one in my stash. And then over the sentiments, I'm going to pour clear embossing powder. All right, so again, my heat tool is nice and hot. I'll go ahead and heat set everything. And I did not surprisingly get any warping. I think it's because I did use a lot of tape and glue. All right, so here you can see I am using the tigerfish's mouth to tuck my coral in. Then I have a fresh, clean sheet of white cardstock I'm gluing to the back of this, and that is going to complete my 3rd card. So here I'm going to show you how the flaps open. Really cool. This one was a lot of fun. And here is a close-up. I just love how that ink blending turned out, and those bright colors just make me so happy. Here's what the back looks like. I thought that was also cool. All right, fourth card. I'm going to do some ink smushing. So on my glass mat, I smushed tumbled glass and peacock feathers, and I'm picking up that ink with a white piece of cardstock. And I did use a little bit of water to mix the two inks and kind of activate them and make it easier to ink smush. I am going to do a couple layers here, and I am drying in between each layer. I think I do one more, and I want a little bit more tumbled glass, so I added more of that. I'm using a paper towel to kind of mix the two, and I think that looks really cool. I was going for like a splashed effect. So this isn't an ocean scene. This is more of like a beach sandy type vibe that I was going for. I'm going to take a stitch rectangle die and die cut both the ink smush background and the sand. And then I have these seashells. I had quite a few of these left, so I thought it would be kind of cool to create a wreath with them. I have that gold ring from the second card. I decided to use that. So this was full on a leftover card. This is not something I would have probably come up with on my own, but I kind of had to improvise, and this ended up turning out really nice. I love how this one turned out. Again, I went with Saltwater Heals Everything. I'm going to clear heat emboss it. And I'm going to make this one into a shaker card. So I have some more acetate that I'm going to add behind my ring. And then I'm going to add 2 layers of Scotch 3M foam tape. Kind of wiping off any glue smudges I had there. Making sure that there's no gaps between the foam tape, because I'm actually going to use seed beads. I wanted to create a shaker that looked like sand. So I'm going to use some brown and gold seed beads for this. And I think it really ends up looking like sand. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I have to use my head, like I have to put this above my head to see through it. So I did have to get off camera, but I did add that on top. And that's how that looks. Really cute. And those seed beads, by the way, come from Michael's. They're recollections. I added my sand to the bottom. And then I'll go ahead and arrange my seashells. So I wanted to do a grouping of 3 and a grouping of 2. So I'm using my art glitter glue to cluster them together so that I can add foam tape to them all at once. I'm going to end up changing the arrangement a little bit on that third, on the trio, I guess. I wanted them to be sort of in a line instead. Thought that looked a little better. All right, so this is going to overlap the gold ring. So in places where it overlaps, I'm going to add glue, and where it overlaps the ink smush panel, I'm going to add 2 layers of foam tape. All right, so then I have some green and white striped pattern paper. This is from Spellbinders, and it matched the green perfectly with the green marker I chose to color my shells with. So I'm going to add that to an A2 card base. Again, I used the striped embossed card stock that came in the kit. And then I'll glue my ink smush panel on top. I popped it up with foam tape, of course. And off camera, I do add a little twine bow where the sand is, but I did that afterwards. So here's what that looks like. I didn't add any more embellishments. I thought this could be a nice masculine card, so I left it as is. All right, for my final card, I have some more rays that I just hand cut. And I'm arranging them onto this stitch circle. And you guessed it, we're going to do some more ink blending with the same Distress Oxide inks. So this is Peacock Feathers. And then at the top I will add Tumbled Glass, and I'm even going to pull in a little bit of Blueprint Sketch for the very bottom of the circle. So here's that Blueprint Sketch. I'm just going to add a tiny amount of that to the bottom. And then I'll go ahead and remove my cut rays. I guess I'm ink blending twice here. I will go over the rays with whatever's left on my blender tool, and then I die cut some more sand using the same stitch circle. I had not a lot of this left, so I added the smallest piece to the bottom there. I have some coral, and then I of course wanted to create my Nemo scene, so I have the clownfish and the dory fish. And in the movie, Nemo and Marlin, is that his name? They live in coral, so I thought this would be cute to include the coral and a starfish for good measure. Layering them up with the white die cuts to add some dimension. I did add some water splatters to the background. I forgot to mention that, but you probably knew that. And then I have a slightly larger light pink stitch circle that I cut from the shimmery pink cardstock that came in the kit. I thought that would complement this pink starfish really well. So I'm going to pop up my ink blended circle on top of the pink one. All right. So I'm going to add my foam tape and pop that up. So this one was very quick and simple. I have my bubbles. I'm going to add one clear one and two blue droplets. And I'm using my art glitter glue to attach those. I did white heat emboss the sentiment, sending you vitamin C. I'm going to add that to the bottom. This card base I created with the cream shimmer cardstock that came in the kit. So this one has a lot of pretty shine to it. The last thing I'm going to do to this card is pop up the sentiment, and that is it. That will finish off all 5 cards that I created with the Hero Arts May 2021 card kit. Please let me know which card was your favorite. I enjoyed creating each and every one of these. I know it's been a while since I've done a Hero Arts card kit video, and I know a lot of you guys want me to bring back the 5 card or 10 card one kit videos, and it really just comes down to time. I don't have a lot of time, guys. I do prioritize Scrappy Tales, that's my business, and if I do have extra time, I'm normally illustrating or designing, but I am going to try every once in a while to bring out one of these videos every so often. I am eyeballing the Simon Says Stamp Frog kit for August, and if I have time, I'll definitely try to do at least a 5 card one kit video for that. But I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know it's a long one. Please, if you haven't yet already, please subscribe to my channel. We are almost at 5,000 subscribers, and my husband said that he is willing to do a voiceover if I hit 5,000. So I think that would be really hilarious. I encourage you guys to subscribe to my channel. I have lots of card making tutorial videos, especially pop-up cards. So I hope you all have a wonderful night, and I will see you next time. Bye.